So anyway, I find this fascinating. Hope you do too. We have Dr. Michael Welner with us, forensic psychiatrist, chairman of the forensic panel, architect of Depravity Standard Research Project. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Garland, and thank you for having me. And not only thank you for your service, but also thank you for illustrating to others that you can live the worst of life and make it all the way around. You're setting an example every day to people who are still finding their way in the darkness. So you're more valuable to your listeners just by being present than you'll ever realize.
Very, very nice compliment. Doctor, I have 10,000 questions for you. I'm looking for the one.
And we haven't even covered the House Resolution 2646 about crisis psychiatry.
Oh, that's right. Because
you and I are having a very good lunch conversation.
Yeah, let's do that because is it Congressman Murphy that we had on about a week ago on the same thing?
No. Yes, sir.
Let's talk about that.
This is the Murphy-sponsored legislation, and it is. Not only is it so important, but as it relates to your listeners, and I'm going to share with you just the experience of a non-politician and someone who's had a close involvement, this is actually a pivotal time for listeners and the general public to have an impact on our society. Right now, right this moment, like not 3 weeks from now, but right now, there's a very critical stage that you may not be aware of because it's all sort of away from view, and in many respects, it parallels what forces we saw at work in the presidential debate last night.
In what way?
Well, you've spoken to Congressman Murphy, and he's pointed out the importance of having a strategy to engage crisis psychiatry, which I'll define for you in one second. And let me tell you from the perspective of a colleague as a forensic psychiatrist and someone who has to actually work to solve problems, whether they're the depravity standard or working in cases. I mean, just to give your listeners some background, I've consulted on some of the most complex forensic psychiatry cases in the current day. I'm one of the people who was a consultant on the James Holmes theater shooting. So when you had your theater incident in Lafayette, the elements are very familiar to me. I work closely with your outstanding district attorney in Jefferson Parish, Paul Connick, whom I would add has been very helpful in contributing data for our analysis in the depravity standard research. And I know what a wrongful conviction is because I was involved in the Damon Thibodeau case as his consultant. So I'm coming at this from the real-world perspective of having to clean up a mess after crisis goes unanswered. Congressman Murphy, who's a psychologist, actually rolled up his sleeves after Newtown and engaged me and others and said, can we actually use government and lawmaking to come up with a solution? And, putting aside the complexity of whether it's guns or whether it's people or whether it's this, I think we can all agree that there is a mental health component that could be improved. What we don't all realize is that crisis psychiatry is more than just the person who goes on a mass shooting. You had Pat Milam on, relating to his son, Matt Milam. How many of your listeners have had the terrible experience of a loved one who's been suicidal in a long-standing way, and they're wondering whether this is the day they lose that love? How many of your listeners deal with job loss in the family and someone who's just too unstable to be resilient the way you yourself have been resilient? How many people who listen to this are veterans coming back and by virtue of lack of services struggle in such a way that they can't handle crisis? And what is our response? Our response as a matter of infrastructure is non-existent. So the reason that this is such an important discussion, and you understand the political process, there is the act, there is the lawmaker who acts, there are people who actually enact legislation, and then there are people who give the appearance of doing something, give the appearance of putting forward legislation so it looks like they're doing something. And that's exactly what is at work in this crisis mental health posture. Dr. Murphy, Congressman Murphy, put forward very complex, far-reaching crisis mental health legislation. It's not just about moving dollars around. It's about the idea, for example, of reforming HIPAA so that if you're a family of a loved one who's really struggling, and when that person leaves the doctor's office in crisis, there's some avenue for you as the caregiver to be able to communicate with your doctor, communicate with the doctor of the person who's caring for your loved one, because you have no owner's manual for how to deal with a crisis. HIPAA doesn't allow that. There are so many casualties of psychiatric care because HIPAA is set up as a wall that gets in the way of families. Families are betrayed, and a law can change that. So that's one pillar. Second pillar, commitment laws. Anyone who listens to this, who has a loved one with mental illness, and it may be schizophrenia or bipolar illness, it may be any number of illnesses, it may be substance abuse. When a person is going down the drain, you go to an emergency room. If that person doesn't want to be hospitalized, all they have to say is that they're not an imminent threat. And the family knows they're going down the drain, but the family is helpless because the commitment thresholds are impossibly high. So the crisis comes, the crisis passes, and everybody shrugs their shoulders and says, we couldn't have prevented this. Well, we can prevent it.
All right,
You prevent it by changing the threshold.
Doctor, hold that thought. Got to take another break. We're coming right back. Listening to Dr. Michael Welner, chairman of the forensic panel, architect of something called the Depravity Standard Research Project. He is asking you to get on this website, depravitystandard.org, and fill out their questionnaire in order that we get our laws to help the violence we're seeing through mental illness and more. We're on the radio with Dr. Michael Welner, a forensic psychiatrist working with a member of Congress, one of our congressmen, Tim Murphy, also a doctor. Architect of something called the Depravity Standard Research Project. He's asking you to join his website, depravitystandard.org, answer the questions there to help us get to a better understanding of the mental side of crime in our court system. Doctor, if you don't mind, let's go to Anthony in Ontario, California. Anthony, I appreciate the call.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am the director of a movement that has been developed as a result of us being in Washington in May, invited by the TAC team, or the Treatment Advocacy Center team. So I represent over 1,200 families across our nation. And what we've done is we developed ourselves as the families affected by SMI, or seriously mental illness, because we were left with this task by Dr. Murphy. As he stated, he is the doctor. He has architected or developed and designed a structured approach to our mental health system that this will be the second time around in Congress. And it seems to just be him trying to get this point across and the reasons why this bill needs to pass. And he reached out to us as the families, and we felt responsible. We couldn't leave Washington without letting people know what we were experiencing. So this movement was developed. We have a website at transformingtreatabletragedies.org. We've also, we didn't know how else to respond to his reply and request. So what we're doing now is we're publicly speaking as much as we can. We're on the TV, we're on newspapers. I have a billboard campaign going up here in California. I don't know what else to do as far as getting the point across to our society.
Anthony, I hate to interrupt you. I got a good idea what you're talking about. We're running out of time. Dr. Welner, you have any thoughts?
I do, and I very much appreciate the Treatment Advocacy Center, and I think I need to inform your listeners of a very critical question. If we all agree that families deserve better infrastructure for crisis mental health, why is nothing being done? I'll tell you why nothing's being done, and here's how it relates to the debates. The reality of Washington, and I've seen this myself, speaking directly to the congressmen who are decision makers. If the leadership in the Democratic and Republican side wanted crisis mental health reform, they could bring the Murphy bill to a vote tomorrow. Congressman Steve Scalise, all of your listeners, if you want crisis mental health reform, you call his office and you say, why hasn't this been done? Why is it that the congressman in the jurisdiction of Lafayette, where the movie theater shooting happened, Congressman Boustany, is signed on to the Murphy bill? Why is it that in Louisiana, Congressman Richmond, Congressman Scalise, Congressman Fleming, Congressman Grace, Congressman Abraham, why haven't they signed on yet? I'll tell you why. Because the Democratic leadership in Congress does not want the Republican leader, anyone Republican, to be able to put forward socially conscious legislation. They don't care. And the problem with the Republican leadership is they are so weak and useless that they will not assert themselves and fight. They would rather pass a watered-down version of legislation to be able to take credit for passing mental health reform. I'll give you an example. Running for governor.
I'm sorry, we're totally out of time, but if we get people to go to our website, depravitystandard.org, they can participate in exactly what you're talking about.
Please
Thank you
call
for
your
the time.
congressman and have him vote for, and have him and demand that 2646 be passed and not a watered down version.
And
simple.
And we'll have you back again. Thank you for the hour. Thank you for what you're doing. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.